Hi everybody, welcome to episode 27 of the Teesside Business Podcast. Today we're very lucky to be joined by Ben Houchen. I'm sure you need no introduction, but...
Thanks for having me on, appreciate it.
No problem, thanks very much for coming down. So we'll jump right into it. Obviously, we're very, very lucky to have you on the podcast. One of the things that you have been incredibly vocal about and is main driving for yourself is business in Teesside. What made you have such a strong stance on business in Teesside and pushing it and things like that?
I think it's from my history. So before I was the mayor, I was trained as a solicitor, mostly doing kind of employment, but then moving into kind of corporate law, mergers and acquisitions type stuff. And then I ran my own business, and actually having exposure to running your own business, one, opens your eyes to what it's actually like to run a business, rather than people say academically, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. But then also the realities on the ground within the Tees Valley area, some of the challenges that are faced, some of the opportunities that you have in the Tees Valley compared to elsewhere, and then just understanding that really, if we're going to succeed as an area, and if the country's going to succeed more generally, this isn't just the Tees Valley. We need more people starting their own businesses. We need businesses to succeed. We need them to create those jobs, and that's how you grow the economy, and that's how you make people better off. So I kind of try to go for the big stuff of what's fundamentally going to change people's lives. And having a strong economy and loads of businesses means that people have choice of jobs. It means they can train in different things. It means you've got a more diverse economy. It means everybody's happier, better off, better able to provide for themselves and their families. I mean, at the root cause of this, it's how do you make the people's lives of the Tees Valley, better, basically.
Absolutely. So what kind of changes do you see? Obviously, how you're looking at things now, I imagine, is the economy as a whole. What kind of things make the biggest changes to everybody and it filters down in Teesside? What kind of stuff did you see from owning your own business at the changes that need to be made at a smaller level versus for the economy? Does that make sense?
Well, I think from a small business perspective, and certainly as a startup business or businesses in their infancy up to kind of the first 3 years, funding is a massive issue for all of them. I mean, getting access to bank funding, first-tier lender funding is an absolute minefield.
Yep.
I still think the system's fundamentally broken in the way first-tier, especially the main high street banks, lend to businesses or fail to lend to businesses because the funding's just not there. And they've gone so far in the other direction of being, putting too much credit into the system because of the crash and because of the restraints that have been put on them by the Bank of England and government, that they're sitting on huge reserves to manage any future shock. But the consequence of that is they're not lending to good, credible businesses. And I saw this even before I was running my own business when I was a solicitor, and you were seeing really good businesses that common sense anybody would invest in, but they couldn't get lending because there wasn't the right security or the lending ratios weren't quite correct from it hadn't been trading long enough, so automatically that disbars a number of businesses from getting a lending. You think, well, the lifeblood of the economy is making sure that there are credit to businesses that are able to then succeed. And ultimately, if a bank manages itself properly, then you're going to get the fruits of that by supporting a business in its infancy. Because the one thing I find with businesses is if you help them on the way, and if banks want to buy into a business, you've basically got a customer for life there.
Oh, absolutely.
And then what that then comes down to is the bank's fundamental changes of the way they work. Yep. So not having a real relationship manager anymore. Like I'm sure you guys and other businesses have a relationship manager in inverted commas. But you don't really. It's basically a guy who helps you fill out a form, and then it goes to the dreaded word, it goes to credit. And we've got to wait for credit to find out whether you're going to get the money or not. And actually there's no personal relationship because that is it's basically an algorithm. It's a tick box exercise to see whether you qualify. Whereas 20 years, exactly, and 20, 30 years ago, you had a proper relationship manager that could make decisions on where money goes because they understood the business, they understood the people. And having moved away from that, I think that's hugely damaging to local business. So trying to find a way in which we can get more money and more support to small businesses, I think is going to be a huge one for the future success of small businesses in the region.
Yeah, I really agree with you. One of the things that we've talked about previously in the podcast, and something that just I personally have observed, especially within our industry and tech and things like that, if you go to other places, even in the UK, it's very much we're starting up a business. The first thing we're going to do is either raise capital by investors or whatever and things like that. But we don't seem to, there's just not that view in Teesside. Everyone seems to try and find the way to make it work for a couple of years or a year or whatever, and then look up and go, actually, what money can we get
Yeah.
Like, do we like? It's one of those where I don't know how many investors are. Last time I looked, I think there was only 2 or 3 angel investors in Teesside in the north.
I think there are some around, but you're right. The numbers are minute. It's a really interesting thing in the Teesside psyche, really, because I think you're right. I think people locally like to give it a go themselves, and they like to keep hold of as much as possible, which I think in one way is great ambition because people want to succeed and they want to take all the success for themselves and their hard work. But at the same time, that's a drawback because getting that financial injection from an angel investor, from an equity partner, from somebody who could also give advice and mentor the business owners through that startup journey. My argument is always I'd rather have 50% of something rather than 100% of nothing.
Yeah.
And there is a view in Teesside, compared to other areas in the country, that there isn't this automatic, right, I've got this idea, let's go and find a business partner to help pump prime it with finance to be able to get it over the line. So, yeah, ultimately we need to change that mindset. It's a difficult thing to change, though. It is a difficult thing to change. And I would say, though, that because London is completely saturated, I'm seeing that there are more... Okay, we're talking at the slightly larger end, but there are big institutional investors, VCs, private equity, are starting to look at places like Teesside because we've got a good story. And also they think, actually, there aren't many players outside of London, and they see it as, well, if we get there first, we'll get the pick of all the businesses. And now that might start at the top end, but then all of a sudden, if you get the VCs and the PEs houses coming along, you then get more angel investors looking at the smaller end, who are then going to turn it into. So I think we're probably 6 months into a journey that's probably going to take 3, 4, 5 years until they see Teesside as a place where they're going to send time, money and resource to look at the businesses they can invest in. Yeah,
I think I wholly agree that, especially like we're building more and more great companies around tech and things like that, but even just local services, we always joke that we're always like a few years behind everywhere else. Like we only got a place that did actual sushi last year. We've only just started to get little coffee shops where...
Still no Wagamamas?
Yeah, still no Wagamamas,
People keep talking about when are we getting a Wagamamas?
Just like, it's weird, we're like 5, it's like a mini bit of a time warp. So what kind of things do you think we need to do as an economy to start changing things and moving forward? Obviously, I know there's no magic pill and things like that, but is it a case of... everybody from yourselves and in government and power, etc., and it filters down, or what can business owners do and things like that? Is it a case of...
Well, I think we need stronger leaders. I think for too long, leaders have talked down the area. I mean, a lot of that around, we can't do it ourselves, there isn't a Wagamama's here, we're always behind the curve, there isn't any finance available. Look, we have some genuine challenges to face, but actually it's not as black and white as that, and we have got some huge success stories. I mean, what you guys are doing is fantastic. You've got some brilliant businesses, specifically in the tech industry, that nobody knows about. But I always use the example of people like Double 11 in Middlesbrough.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah, first tier provider, Microsoft, working on the Xbox console releases for Christmas 2019. You've got people like Merlin Flex in Hartlepool, great tech business.
Yeah.
Doing the microchip work in things like the Typhoon fighter jet helmets. They actually put the microchip technology into Sebastian Vettel's Formula 1 winning car.
Oh, really?
In the steering wheel when he last won the championship. So, this is all going on locally.
Yeah.
So we have got some great success stories, but one thing that we don't do as leaders, and I also think then that for whatever reason businesses don't do it, is we don't shout about all the good things we've got.
We're terrible at it.
But we need to do it because, look, I'm sorry, do I think Sadiq Khan in London, when he goes off to America or China, is telling everybody about the brilliant things that Teesside do? Of course he's not. He's saying, come and invest in London. Yeah. So unless we do it ourselves, nobody else is going to do it. So I think whether it's me or whether it's every business from startups to all the big established businesses, we need to start shouting much more positively about the things that we've got, because I've always been of the opinion that life is 90% marketing and comms. Yeah. And actually, if you've got a really positive message and we look like an area on the up and we look like an area that's got things to offer and our message is really clear to the rest of the country and the rest of the world, we're already starting to see from some of the positive messages we're giving out that people are all of a sudden coming up to the area and saying, well, we want a piece of that. And hang on, who else is, that sounds really good, we want to be associated with it, because ultimately people want to be associated with good things and good places.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you can generate that buzz, once you get people here, we've got brilliant things to offer. But actually getting people here in the first place is quite difficult because of that kind of stereotypical historical message of the area, which is completely outdated, let's be honest.
I mean, massively so now.
We're not all flat caps and whippets, and we're not just steelworks. I mean, we've got some fantastic 21st century businesses, and unfortunately the rest of the country doesn't know about it yet.
I think you really hit the nail on the head of we don't shout about our own wins and things like that for whatever reason it may be. As Teesside, we're all terrible at it as businesses. Like, we always say is our business. We need to shout about our wins, etc. more. And same as when people come on the podcast, like I've known some of the great things that people have done, but I've literally had to pull it out. It's a perfect platform for the go, actually, we've done great work with X, Y, and Z.
It's a lovely understated thing in Teesside, though. At the same time, it's very much, look, I've got this great business, I'm happy doing what I'm doing, I just get on and do it. And I think there is an element to people in Teesside that if they talk about it, they feel like they're bragging. And actually, we've got to get over that. You're not bragging. Actually, you should be proud of what you've built and what you've created and the jobs you've created. We need to get over that kind of stigma that if you're talking about the great things you're doing as a business, it's bragging. It's not bragging.
No, not at all. It's interesting that you brought up, obviously, marketing and communications. Obviously, as being a marketing company and things like that, one of the things that I've noticed and had my eye on is your adoption of using things like social media, paid ads, YouTube, etc., which is very different from 99.9% of politicians generally, across the board.
Absolutely is.
I saw an article recently of, I won't say here, but of how much you've spent on paid ads and things like that. Like, I think I've commented on something that you should have spent double it. I'm not ashamed of my form, absolutely. But it's really interesting for us to have somebody who is actually kind of in touch with how marketing and attention is at the moment. So what was your choice of kind of like going so like heavily in on social and things like that? Because it is unusual.
I think firstly, I think it's an age thing. I think if you look at your average politician, what are they in their like 50s? I mean, they didn't grow up with the technology. I always like to say, and this is a kind of a tech snob thing to say, I suppose, but I was one of those kids that grew up in the analog age and the digital age. I remember the AOL dial-up systems. I remember all of that stuff. I remember being like 9, 10, 11 when you grew up understanding a world before sat at your computer from 4-year-old with your iPad to buying into it and realising, I'm thankfully just at that age where I'm not too old to understand what technology can deliver. So it's only going one way. We're all becoming more digital based. We're all becoming more subscription based. Facebook is still a big driver, whatever people think, for political engagement. Often, especially the older demographic as well. We all know that actually young kids are no longer signing up to Facebook because it's the thing that the parents are on.
All these platforms.
But there's a thing that politicians don't get as well. So politicians don't get that. Actually, Facebook isn't the cool social media thing that kids go on anymore. It's what the parents do. And there is that disconnect that actually with the kids, it's all Snapchat, Insta's obviously the big thing at the minute. And there's a couple of other things. But Facebook, when you're looking at the old demographic and the ones that are more likely to vote, Facebook is still a massive platform. You've still got billions of people signed up to it. So from my point of view, the other reason we go massive on it, and I'm thankful to have people like Jason, who's like my comms officer, who understands these things far better than I as well, is that I've got 650,000 people that live within the Tees Valley. We've got 500,000 people who can vote at the election. I can't afford to put a leaflet through everybody's door. It would cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to do that and engage with people on the level that I engage with. Whereas I can spend a few quid on Facebook, social media. We can gather likes, and therefore we can pump out messages to people and let people know what's going on much more cheaply and much more effectively. To be honest, I mean. Yes, I'm quite proud of the fact that I have spent more money on social media than any other politician in the UK. Because I defy anybody to go on my Facebook page and look at anything political. I'm just there about promoting the things that I'm doing and promoting what's going on in the Tees Valley. And if people don't like it, then they probably shouldn't be living in the Tees Valley. I mean, it's all good things for the area. It's all about promoting the area.
It is, it was one of the things that are... just one of the first things I noticed, because obviously the great thing about using it at scale as you guys are doing is not only you being able to reach people where they're actually paying attention rather than leaflets that are going in the bin or print adverts, etc., or whatever, but it's the data that you guys can gather back because then you get in a very real interpretation of who's actually interested in what you guys are putting out and things like that.
And it's this whole nonsense to some extent around I don't know whether you want to talk about Brexit or not, but I'm not talking about Brexit. Just as the analogue of, as the aside of this whole idea that there were all these kind of dark groups set up on Facebook, and actually all they're doing is they're using data that they have to be able to target messaging. So it's not as if I'm spending loads of money just completely blanketing the Tees Valley. Actually, we are continually refining who we target. We're continually targeting who's actually interested in what message. So a great example of the data gathering that we did on and off Facebook is we pushed the message through Facebook. We've got the website. We did a very kind of public campaign on the airport. And within 6 weeks, I think it was, we had 15,000 people sign up saying that they were massive supporters of the airport. Now, they might not be Tory supporters, they might be Labour supporters, they might not care about politics at all, but we know they care about the airport.
Yep.
And so we can target them and say, well, if we're going to talk about the airport, we will let them know about it. I'm not going to let Joe Bloggs down the road know about the airport if he really doesn't care. And that's just about messaging, it's about targeting, it's about motivating people around what they care about. And I think that's a big thing of where politics is going. It's what people don't get, I think, about young people. Young people, I don't think, are intrinsically left-wing, and I don't think they're necessarily intrinsically right-wing. I think what's different to traditional party politics is that people, especially young people, care about what they care about.
Yeah.
And that can often be what is traditionally seen as a left-wing agenda or a right-wing agenda, but they care about issues rather than party politics.
Yeah.
And so if you can engage with that young person on an issue, then they will support you on it, whether you're a Tory or whether you're Labour or whatever you are, it doesn't matter. But you've got to engage on issues now. And social media is a great way to engage on issue-based politics.
Absolutely. So you briefly mentioned the hospital. I keep going to call it a hospital. I don't know why. It's got nothing to do with the hospital. The airport.
That is a lifeline to Teesside.
It is, yeah.
There you go.
See, that's how the brain made the link there. So... Obviously, it's been a big part of what you've been doing. It's a fantastic thing. I don't think anybody could argue that it's not. If they did, I would challenge them. They wouldn't be educated on it. For obviously quite timely. It's the deal's just gone over the line, etc.
Yep.
Can you give people who are listening a very brief breakdown over what's happened over the last 2 years and what it means to the area now that it's kind of come back in?
No, absolutely. And I suppose this is an exclusive because it's the first interview I've actually given since the announcement last week. So there you go. So 2 years ago, I don't pretend that the only reason I'm sat here is I made the very bold pledge in the election to buy the airport, and it caught a lot of people's attention. It certainly caught the imagination of the public because when we were out campaigning before the election, it was just one of those things that just cut through. It's the reason we made the pledge. I'm born and raised here. I know how important the airport is to people, which is why we said it. But even I underestimated just the impact that made during the election. An election that people didn't really care about or understand. What's a mayor? What's this all about? Does it really matter? And I think it was firstly, it helped people understand what a mayor could in theory do. And it also was something that goes to the psyche of Teesside, that people want a successful airport. It has been successful before. So I know that I was only elected because I made that pledge. And so I had to deliver on it. Otherwise, I was 100% certain if I didn't, I wasn't going to be re-elected, or there was no chance of me getting re-elected at all. So it's been a pretty hard slog.
Yeah.
Peel have been really awkward through the negotiations, as you would expect. They're just doing what's in their best interests. But I think the date was the 26th, 27th of November, I finally got an agreement in principle with Peel to buy the airport. So from actually agreeing a deal with Peel, like shaking the hand and saying, okay, we can look at going forward with this, it took us, a matter of weeks to buy the airport. I mean, we've bought the airport in a short space of time than most people buy a house.
Yeah.
Which is how quickly we've moved on with it. And the team have been brilliant in it being able to do that. So we've now bought the airport. Peel no longer own it, we do. But I think what's more exciting, and it's one of the reasons we wanted to wait and do the announcement last week, is that we've also got Stobart Aviation who are going to be running the airport for us. So the way it's going to work is that we own the airport. We own 75% of the airport, which means we've got complete control over what happens to the airport or what doesn't happen with the airport. And Stobart will own 25% of the airport. So that means they've got some skin in the game about wanting to see it succeed.
Yep.
They're not just picking up a fee for a service in effect for managing the airport. They've got a stake in the success of the airport because the more it succeeds, the more value is going to go to them as a business. And also the business plan that we produced that was very public in early January that you can still see on my website and on the Combined Authority website, all kind of 230 odd pages of it. That is a plan that was produced with Stobart. So I've been speaking to Stobart for 18 months now, and all of the stuff that we've done, all of the plans that we've done, to some extent, some of the discussions with Peel have all involved Stobart. So that plan about getting a new low-cost carrier, so someone like a Ryanair or an EasyJet, moving the airport back into profit, getting new routes over the next 10 years, hopefully reaching 1.4 million passengers a year over the next 10 years. That isn't just us saying to Stobart, right, here's a plan, do it.
Yeah.
That's their plan. They actually came up with a lot of the numbers in that because those are the experts. So I think as well it adds a huge amount of credibility to the fact that you've got somebody who already runs a successful airport, is reopening an airport in Carlisle, that they're buying into this project. And it just shows that, as we all know locally, Teesside Airport can be a great airport again.
Yeah, massively. Just for us as a business, like we do a lot of travelling, things like that. Like we're flying to the next event. It's a big difference for us to go 10 minutes down the road to the airport, or having to go all the way to Newcastle, pay to park the car for a week or whatever, and going through all of that, it makes such a difference.
But the more, I mean, connectivity to the rest of the world is clearly, essential and important. But I would argue something that's even more important is having that potential for inward investment. Mm-hmm. And I said it last week during the announcement. International investment doesn't arrive in a bus; it comes through an airport terminal. Yeah. And when I'm speaking to, which we do regularly, investors from North America, South Africa, the Far East, most of our investors are international. Mm-hmm. I can only think of one, for example, on the old Redcar Steelworks site that's a UK-based business. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking to them, you kind of think, well, when they say, well, how do you get there? And you say, well, you've got a flight to Newcastle, you've got a flight to Manchester, and then you've got to get a train or drive. Yeah. That's not a message an international business wants to hear. They want to know that they can fly into an area, because that also makes a statement to them that this is an area that's well connected and is on the up. If you have to say to somebody, look, you've got a flight to Manchester, and you've got to get a really rubbish train for 2 hours, or you've got to drive for 2 hours and there might be a load of traffic, they're going to think, well, hang on, why would I invest here if it's difficult to get to? I tell you what, I'll just invest in Manchester, which is why Manchester is getting so much investment. So the inward investment opportunity is massive, and it also sends a very strong signal to the rest of the world that we're open for business. Yeah, massively. So I know a big part of you is that you've talked about is travel infrastructure as a whole, not just the airport. You mentioned trains and things like that. Yeah. Again, that's something that we use a lot as a business. It can work incredibly well or be incredibly frustrating. Just a bit. But as using it as a business, when things don't run smoothly, there is a knock-on effect that causes problems. Yep. So I'm sure that I saw something that there was investment, or there was infrastructure going into, or a couple of train stations staying open, I think it was. Yeah, well, we've put in, a few months ago we announced £45 million in rail investment, so that was £25 million going into Darlington Station to start the redevelopment of that, and then £20 million towards the redevelopment of Middlesbrough Station to allow for the direct trains to London starting in 2021. And that work needs to be done, it needs to be done quickly, otherwise it won't start in 2021 as part of the new franchise. Which means that the earliest opportunity to get a London train from Middlesbrough is likely to be 2024, 2025, and it's just too far away, especially for a town like Middlesbrough that should be better connected than it is. So we're getting on with that. It's not going to be easy. There have already been some delays, but we're investing in that. The £25 million for Darlington is more technical, but it's more important, arguably, than Middlesbrough, because anybody that gets that local line. So if you jump on the train at... if I jump on the train at Yarm, or you jump on at Thornaby or Middlesbrough, wherever, and you want to get into Darlington, you can only get 2 trains an hour on the local line into Darlington. Because if you'll know, and your listeners will know, you have to cut across the East Coast Main Line, and you park in the middle of the train station, don't you, in that little rubbish pacer train. And that basically, because you cut across the East Coast Main Line, it limits how many movements you're allowed across the East Coast Main Line, because it's obviously such an important artery for the country. Whereas what we're doing is we're talking about moving that to the other side of the East Coast Main Line, because it doesn't need to cut across, it just historically has. Yeah. Building a big local station on the side of the main Darlington Station on the East Coast Main Line, and then once those improvements are done, that allows to get up to 8 trains an hour. Yeah. So all of a sudden you can then jump on a train every 6 or 7 minutes in the Tees Valley and get anywhere in the Tees Valley on a train. That transforms public transport within the Tees Valley. Absolutely. It means fewer cars on the road. It means actually if you live in Darlington and you want to get a job on the old steelworks site, then it's very easy to use public transport. You don't have to drive, you don't have to afford a car. So it's important not just to create the jobs, but making sure you connect people across the area to access the jobs we're creating. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, just making things easy for people is always a phenomenal step. So you mentioned obviously Middlesbrough railway station there. I know that's getting, and I think the bus station as well is getting a complete makeover. There's a lot of investment obviously. I think the council have invested some money in Middlesbrough station already. Yeah. There was a huge uproar when Middlesbrough wanted to move the station to where Middlehaven is basically, and make it into a bus station train complex. But I can't remember what the number was. There were 5,000 or 6,000 people signed a petition saying they didn't want it moved. So that's now staying where it is. Yeah. So they've invested a bit of money in Middlesbrough Station. That's definitely not moving. But there's some redevelopment around the town centre in Middlesbrough that we're looking at to help support getting more footfall into the town. Yeah. Why would you want to go into Middlesbrough? Mm-hmm. Retail's changing. All of that stuff is changing. Well, how do you make it a destination for people to spend time? Yeah. And as you're seeing retail wind down, we're trying to work with Middlesbrough to understand, well, what can we do to make people want to come to Middlesbrough if it's not retail? Yeah. And I think they're still grappling with that question at the minute. I don't think they've got a particularly clear answer. They're working on it, but people like Stockton, for instance, I think Stockton Council are genuinely doing a fantastic job with some of the plans that they haven't yet released. And I think they'd punch me in the face if I tried to release it now.
No, let's go for all the exclusives.
I honestly couldn't. I really couldn't. Otherwise, they would really be upset with me. But at some point in the future, they're going to publicly announce the plans that we funded. So the £20 million we gave to Stockton was for a big redevelopment in their high street. And if those plans come off, that will be massive. That will be a place. Stockton, if they get it right, will be a place that you will want to go to. Yeah. Not to buy things, but to spend time.
Yeah.
It'll be a genuine high street of the future. We just, touch wood, we're working with them to make sure it comes off, but that would be transformational. Whereas a couple of the other areas, Darlington and Middlesbrough, are still struggling about what do we want our town centre identity to be in the years to come.
Yeah, it seems to, from like an outsider looking in with obviously not knowing reasons why and infrastructure, etc. But same with Stockton Town Centre and Middlesbrough Town Centre, it seems like the high street itself seems to be getting emptier and emptier. But if you move slightly off into the side streets, like Stockton, for example, is teeming with business startups and like incredible businesses. Same as, it seems to be moving away from the town centre in Middlesbrough, but you go to Baker Street, Bedford Street, and Linthorpe Road up that way.
It's a mixture, though, isn't it? So if you look at, Stockton is a great example, and it's on a micro scale at the minute, but they need to kind of ramp it up with these redevelopment plans. It's much more commercial-based businesses, so it's not retail business, it's actual commercial business, which we need more of, certainly the startup end, which will then attract larger businesses, or you'll get the startup businesses growing into big businesses and wanting to stay in the area. So that makes the whole economy just much more sustainable. But then you also notice around Baker Street, it's also around a visitor economy.
Yeah.
So again, it's part of that. Why I live in Yarm, grew up in Ingleby Barwick, family still living in Ingleby Barwick. Why would I or they want to come and spend time in Stockton High Street? It's not because there's a startup in the High Street, albeit that's important for the High Street. It's you need to make it a place where people want to go and spend time and just be, and make it into a place that people want to go and spend time. I mean, Yarm High Street historically has been a great example of that, with the bars and the restaurants, and it has a feel that people like to just spend time in and around the High Street. Stockton, the size of it, needs to do something more transformational than Yarm, and it can do that. It can do that, but it's going to take time.
So, obviously one of the things that we talk about a lot on the podcast is what can we all do, like if we had a magic wand and could make all businesses work collectively for the greater good, what can we all do to make the area prosper, and move forward? Is it a case of just continue to try and be successful, or working closely with local partners, or trying to attract outside investment into their businesses or other areas? Is there anything that we can do?
For me, I think if anybody can buy into a change, it's to try and change people's attitudes towards business generally. So I think there is a step change in that, and I think the traditional old industries predispose us to wanting business to do well. But actually we need to change that to say, as a young person, actually starting your own business is a career opportunity. You don't have to be a teacher, you don't have to be a solicitor, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to do what is seen as kind of a traditional, you get qualifications, you go into a job. Actually running your own business is an option, and exposing people to what those options are, and that's why I've always been so keen on things like careers advice, to arm young people with the information to make an informed decision about what they want their future to be. Because if people only have a certain amount of information, all of a sudden their horizons are limited to the information they have. And you know what? There might be a kid out there that has no idea what you guys are doing or what Double 11 are doing. But if they did, they'd want to go into computer software programming. They'd want to go into coding, and they might even start out saying, instead of having to go and work for somebody, you can start out being self-employed. You can do some freelance stuff, or you can start your own business doing coding, doing it in whatever it might be. So I think making sure that people understand that business isn't a dirty word, that young people should see it as a genuine career option, and then getting businesses to shout about, again, it goes back to the point, businesses have to shout about what they're doing, not just for their own benefit, but for local people's benefit, to say, well, hang on, I didn't realise that was even an option. I didn't even know that was a job, or that was a business that existed. That's something that really excites me. And then all of a sudden you inspire young people to try something they wouldn't have otherwise tried. So it's just that message about business, what you do, what any business does. I'm continually amazed. I've lived here my whole life, and it wasn't until I did this job that I can talk about the businesses who have been kind enough to invite me in. And I've lived here my whole life, so I can just think 99% of people out there have no idea of all the brilliant things that are going on. And even more, I would imagine nearly 100% of young people have no idea about what's going on. So how do we encourage them and inspire them to get involved in a career, or get involved in starting their own business, if people don't even know what's going on in the local area? That has been the biggest thing that has drawn our area back, that people just aren't aware of the good things that are going on.
Yeah, and there is so many.
There's a huge amount going on. Huge amount.
There's incredible companies, not even from the engineering to the tech side, and even creative industries and things like that. It's just
massive. Absolutely. I mean, Dom Lasardi, an immersion, was in the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
Talking about, as one of the, I can't remember what it was, he was one of the top 100 tech businesses of a certain category.
Yeah.
Featured in there. I mean, that's Teesside. I mean, that's not happening in mainland Europe. It's not happening in Silicon Valley. That's happening in Teesside.
Yeah.
And what they do as a subsector of the digital and tech industry is absolutely fantastic. I mean, that's happening here.
Yeah.
Like I said about the Merlin Flex and the Formula One cars. I mean, you've got Cummins in Darlington on an engineering side.
Yeah.
All of the engines that they produce, because they make clean diesel engines, all of those engines go into the London bus network.
Yeah.
And because they go into the London bus network, they're now selling them to China, because China want what goes into the big red buses in London.
Yeah.
All being created in Darlington. I mean, there are just so many great examples of what go on. It's frightening, really. And I know it's even more upsetting to me that when I speak to people about it, no idea.
It's
no idea.
Which is one of the reasons why we started the podcast. There is so many phenomenal businesses in the local area. So when people come on the podcast, we ask everybody the same 3 questions.
All right.
These are probably a little bit more personal based than they are policy based. So
could have told me these in advance.
Then people have rehearsed ones. That's how we get you. You see. Don't worry, we're kind. So, I've got to remember the 3 questions now. It's been a while since we've done it. So the first question is, what does success look like to you personally? Reason that we ask it is everybody is different. Some people have said it's when I've got X amount in the bank. Some people have said when I can spend time with my family, when I've done this with my business, with that. It's so good to see such a diverse range of answers. And especially for people who are listening, everybody thinks that success should be big house, sports car, whatever, those things. So it's good for people to hear that there is
Yeah, and I've always been clear, and I've said it plenty of times before. Money's never driven me at all. I actually took a very big pay cut from the business I was running to do this job, because I'm in a fortunate position that I'm not necessarily struggling financially, and I don't need to earn mega bucks. I've never earned mega bucks, but I've always been comfortable. And for me, it's always been about I think I said this in a different recent interview, actually. My brother, when I was my brother's a bit of a geek, really, and reads a lot. And at the time, when he was like 13 or 14, was reading a lot of ancient Greek literature, the Odyssey and stuff like that. And one of the things that came out, he said, and it's always stuck with me, is that the ancient Greeks decide on whether somebody is kind of famous, to want of a better, you've achieved, like the purpose of life for the ancient Greeks was whether they were remembered or not in the annals of time. And it's about, what mark are you making that means that in years to come, when either, I'm not in this job or whether I'm dead, that, will you be remembered for the mark that you made? And this job is such a unique opportunity for me to be able to do that. And so success for me, I think, being elected was a big ask, but I think major success for me would be being re-elected, because I think, one, having that affirmation from the public of a track record. So it's one thing getting elected in the first place, but nobody knows who you are. They don't know whether you're any good or not, but they kind of put some kind of hope in you and say, look, we'll give you a chance. So that's one thing. But getting re-elected, having to stand on your own record, I think is much more significant. And that would mean much more success to me than getting elected in the first place. And it would also help towards this idea that the things I've done in the last 3 years, by the time I stand for re-election, have had a significant impact, and they are making a positive difference. And which is why when you talk about the airport, I mean, I get a bit embarrassed when people kind of pat me on the back and say, well done for buying the airport. To some extent, I'm not really interested about buying the airport. I want to be able to look back in 10, 15, 20 years' time and see a successful airport. Because that's when you've made a difference. If I look back in 10, 15, 20 years' time and see that the airport's closed and we've wasted a whole lot of taxpayers' money, that's no good to me. And that hasn't made any difference, and it hasn't created jobs, and it hasn't had the knock-on impact for the Tees Valley that I wanted it. I suppose I'm much more altruistic in trying to make more of a positive impact in the area. And that's why I've always been in politics, and it's why I love this job, because it's the area you're from as well. And if you're going to make a difference, make it in your local area. So success to me would be re-election, which I'll be honest, I think there's probably only a 10-15% chance I get re-elected.
Well, fingers crossed for you, bud.
Well, we'll see. Time will tell.
So the second question that we like to ask everybody is, have you ever had a failure or a perceived failure or setback that's later led to further success?
Yeah, the one thing I think the one thing I put a lot of my resilience down to, and one of the things that I learned at a relatively young age when I was 17, 18, was I was a semi-successful rugby player.
Right. I think you know Tom Corrigal.
Yeah, I know Tom. Yeah. So I don't have any time anymore, but when I had time, I used to run out on a Saturday just for like a social game of rugby at Middlesbrough. So I started playing rugby at Middlesbrough when I was 5, 6 years old. So when I was kind of 16, 17, I was playing for Yorkshire County. I was at what was the Leeds Tykes, which is now Yorkshire Carnegie Academy at Headingley. And I was in the England development squad at under 17, 16, 17. So I was basically kind of an academy player at England. And I got really, really serious back injury. I fractured 3 vertebrae in my back, which wasn't nice. Which meant I wasn't even allowed to jog for 18 months, and I was on my back for weeks, and it was pretty serious. I mean, had my back been bent by another 1/4 of an inch, I probably would have been paralysed from kind of just below, like the arms down. But basically, that put paid to any sort of kind of rugby career. Because at that age, rugby was my life. I didn't go out drinking. I didn't touch a drop of alcohol until I was 18 because I had to keep a kind of a diet, diary, all this kind of stuff. And then when kind of the shutters came down, it's like, well, you're 17, 18, you've been out of action for basically 2 years. Yeah. You're not getting a professional contract. That hit me pretty hard because my whole life was I was going to be a professional rugby player. Yeah. And that kind of major setback, when at that age you just think, well, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life and that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. It really makes you reflect that you either fought. I find in those types of circumstances, I could have either just fallen and given up and thought, well, that's what I was going to do and it's over now. I suppose I'm pleased to see that that did build a lot of resilience into me. So I get knockbacks all the time now, and I kind of look back and think, you know what, you just get up and go again. You've got to get up and go again, otherwise, what's the point? Exactly. You've got to. And actually, business is a great example of that. People have businesses fail for a multitude of reasons, and sometimes it's nobody's fault, often the bank's fault. But you get up and go again. You start again, and you've seen some of the most successful people in business. They get knocked over, but they get up and go again. And unless you fail, I am also, it sounds very cliched, a true believer in you learn a lot more from your failures than you do from your successes.
Oh, you do.
And looking back at some of the failures I've had, they do kind of inbuild into you how you live your life. So I would say the rugby thing has been a massive one. And when I ran my own business, there were plenty of setbacks in business. But having never run a business before, I went from a start-up to turning over £4.5 million in 18 months, employing 30 people. A lot of setbacks, a lot of real difficulties in that scenario. But you just got to fight through, and I'm a stronger person for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the last one is one item or thing that you are utterly obsessed with at the moment. We've had people come in and said TV shows, gadgets, new stuff that they've recently bought, whatever it may be. Just thing they like so much.
So the one thing that I am completely obsessed with, and it's kind of an ongoing hobby of mine, and my team always laugh at me for it, is I got into home automation in quite a serious way.
Yeah.
And I started buying. This is. I'll tell you how it started. For my birthday last year, my sister-in-law bought me an Alexa.
Yeah.
And it just started as that. I got an Alexa. So I thought, oh, that's quite cool. And I started reading about it, plugged it in, started looking through what you could do with it. And then all of a sudden it just went from there. Yep. So then I bought a Nest. So all my heating systems run off a Nest now. Got that installed. And I thought, well, what can I do there? So I've got all the plugs. So all my lighting is now controlled by Alexa. I'm actually going to put in quite a big. I'm getting rid of my Samsung Smart Things, and I'm actually going to get kind of a custom built home automation system.
All right.
That's going to basically control my whole house.
Oh my god.
So I've got future plans for putting in automated blinds and all that kind of stuff. So my wife's kind of pulling her hair out, and she absolutely. She's quite upset with her sister at the moment for buying me the Alexa in the first place. But anything home automation, I'm pretty obsessed with.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm the same. Yeah. I've done it, but I did it without asking my wife. But it's quite funny to hear my 2-year-old daughter try and say Alexa to make things work.
Yeah. But Alexa always just wakes up when you say random things as well. And I also discovered, I'm sure you already know this as well, that obviously she's always on, not always on, but she kind of half records things, and it's really interesting going into the Alexa app. and hearing kind of snippets that she's just recorded
Yeah,
randomly.
Just like trying to pick up
Bit
to
of a
learn.
worry, I suppose, but I'm not saying anything controversial. So I'm a bit more relaxed.
What's really good if you haven't seen it is...
And actually, last week, literally last week, we just installed an automated alarm system as well.
All right, okay.
Yeah, it's all run through the app, and I'm about to get installed the Ring.
Yeah.
We're
on about getting one for the premises here.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, so basically Mark Zuckerberg, obviously of Facebook, takes like a personal project every year. I think it was last year he basically wrote himself an AI and to run an automated home for himself. But the voice of the AI is Morgan Freeman.
Really?
Obviously play it to do it, yeah. It's on YouTube, search for it. Like, obviously, he set it up to do everything in his home, including, like, a T-shirt cannon and, like, loads and loads of stuff. But it's really fun to watch. Like,
I think what I'm going to do, I've realised, my personal preference is I'm probably going to get rid of the Alexa.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go for a Google Assistant. Google Assistants seem a lot more comprehensive than Alexa.
See, we've got both in the office there, but I'm Alexa at home. The reason that I got it is because at the time, Google wouldn't work with Spotify.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's why I went for Alexa
But
at the time.
Google's a lot more open system now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or open source. So loads of APIs can plug into it. But Alexa was the first one on the market, so that's why people got it. And I've also thought I'm going to get Google Assistant because it's better.
Yeah.
And then I can re-gift the Alexas to people and hopefully introduce home automation to other people.
To everyone. But it's really good. But like, not a lot of people know you can make calls through the Alexa and stuff like that, like we do.
But the Alexa's a pain because you've got to have them in your contacts and they've got to be registered at Alexa. It's not as fluent as it should be in being able to make mobile calls through it.
Yeah.
So, but they're tweaks. I mean, they must be able to do that pretty quickly. So there's like loads of little things that it could do a lot better.
I saw a good thing about Google Assistant that they're bringing in is AR, which is augmented reality for anybody, but with Google Maps is coming in the next year.
Yeah.
So rather than like trying to work out with Google Maps which way to walk, you'll literally be able to just
do it,
and it'll say go this way and
That's
stuff
good.
like that. So that looks.
But
really
it's like the most irritating thing on the home automation front at the minute is my new Samsung TV isn't compatible at all with either smart things. It's a Samsung TV and it's not compatible with Samsung smart things, nor is it compatible with Alexa. So that's pretty infuriating.
It'll be like in a few years, like we'll be telling our children back in our day, you have to pick up the remote, point.
Yeah, but I like my technology, but I'm kind of semi-literate. So the one thing I would love to have the time to understand the Raspberry Pis and being able to program them, because then you can actually do anything you want.
Yeah.
But that's like just a level too advanced for me to be able to do it all myself.
It's just
I need like a ready-made like consumer-friendly product rather than any sort of programming expertise.
It's probably an opportunity for any coders out of it.
Yeah, absolutely, there is.
Right, so I know you guys have got some time constraints, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. It's
been great to chat to you.
Yeah, really interesting.
We could chat for a long time on a lot of issues, but thank you again so much.
Pleasure.
This has been the Teesside Business Podcast. The Teesside Business Podcast is promoted and produced by Person to Person Marketing. Thanks very much for listening.